Welcome to today's episode. I have a very special guest with me. Many of you have heard him before. He was guest a few times. It's no one else but the legendary Thomas Maurer. Thomas, welcome to today's episode.
Thank you very much, Dave, for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, really. Thanks for taking the time. Now, Thomas, it's now pretty much a week ago since we closed out Ignite this year. And as always, a lot of great announcements, a lot of great momentum and energy. I know you were heavily involved. I think you even did a live stream one of the days with one of your colleagues about some of the announcements around hybrid. And so the key question is today a little bit as we're looking back, what are some of the key takeaways and what are some of the biggest, most important things that you took out of it?
So yeah, it was a very, very busy time, obviously, as you can imagine. Not just for me, I mean for a lot of people inside Microsoft. Before such an event, obviously a lot of preparation goes into that. As you know, from your involvement as well. So yeah, there was obviously a ton of great things, announcements in different spaces of Microsoft, right? In M365, in stuff we did when it comes to mixed reality and productivity and hybrid work and much more. But obviously what I was most excited about and what I was most looking forward to were the announcements when it comes to hybrid and multi-cloud, right? And we had a couple of absolutely awesome announcements and surprising announcements, I guess, for many people out there at this year's Ignite.
So if you had to pick, what would you say are your top, let's say, 3 announcements out of the hybrid space?
So I think if I need to pick the top 3, so first of all is the enhancements we have with Azure Arc, right? And Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes. So there's a couple of things which I think also in the Azure Arc enabled data space and machine learning, we had a couple of announcements there and improvements when it comes to all of that. That was basically a big one, but the smallest of the 3, right? So this is where I see a lot of usage already, where people are actually using the product and they get some really cool new stuff and monitoring stuff for your Kubernetes clusters, for example. But again, much more as well. But if you look at the other 2, and those are really the surprising ones, because these are not just something we already announced, but now we added functionality or we announced their GA. It's really new stuff, right? So the first one was, I would say I want to talk about is the Azure Stack HCI enhancement we have, and especially Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI, right? So Azure, as you know, for people who want to run VDI or session hosts, especially Windows 10 or Windows 11 multi-session hosts, this was something you could only do in Azure using the Azure Virtual Desktop offering. And it is obviously working great, but a lot of customers also have reasons why they want to run them in their own data center location, right? So it can be latency critical applications, for example, where you or places, or you have no connectivity at your place, or you don't want to rely on internet connectivity in general, the usual reasons. And so what we now announced is that you can actually run Azure Virtual Desktop on top of Azure Stack HCI, at least the node pools, right? So you still get this awesome control plane in Azure. So when a user connects, it decides where should it go. So it can be an Azure Virtual Desktop, or it could be an on-prem, depending on your configuration. And then as soon as you do the connection, so if I sit in the office next to the Azure Stack HCI environment with AVD on top, we're using a technology called, I think it's called Fast Path or Short Path RTP. And then I have a direct connection to these AVD machines running on top of Azure Stack HCI. I think that was one of I heard so many customers saying, this is awesome. We want to have this. This is something we need. Why can't there's so much request for this. And obviously we didn't talk about it for a long time. And now when we announced it, people were okay, this finally, yes, this is what we want.
Now, before you go on to your third, I have a follow-up question on the control plane. Because that kind of like is awesome because it opens all these new scenarios, right? For example, I could say my HR team as an example, right? I want them or their sessions to run locally, but let's say you maybe have some people that work in your supply chain as an example. And so you could basically say, hey, these users are going to be mapped to VMs in the cloud, or where the guest is in the cloud, and you could determine with a policy and say, okay, but Thomas and everything Thomas is working on is confidential or whatever, and I want to have it run on premises. And then when you basically start the session, and you don't have to worry about that control plane that assigns that, you just configure and say, Thomas goes to my Azure Stack HCI host, so to speak, and this person goes to a public host, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely correct. And it's not just deciding, like the thing is, even before we made this announcement, the control plane was obviously something which was very important. First of all, if you ever did like a RDS deployment with Windows Server, for example, or even with other products, in many cases, you obviously were also responsible to like manage and build and install that control plane and then make it usable, right? That is one thing. And the other big part was like, even before we decided between cloud and on-prem, if you're a global company, you probably want to have the user from the US actually connect to a VM close by in the US, right? And users from Europe, you want to connect them to machines running in Europe, and so on, right? And so that is also where the control plane can help. That if I'm a user and I start working, I get assigned a machine running as close as possible to me, and our Azure regions across the globe are offering this awesome experience. So if a company wants to deliver virtual desktops basically anywhere, they can do that using Azure. Yeah.
It's awesome. So now let's go back to your third of the announcements where I stopped you.
Yeah, I think so. The third one was really a big one, a big announcement, which like not a lot, like a lot of people were asking for it, but not a little. I don't think anyone really expected it, and that was the capability to manage VMware Vsphere directly from Azure. So what does that mean? We call that Azure Arc enabled Vsphere, and what we actually do is we connect to the vCenter server, and we basically get that information, what VMs are running, and we provide you in Azure not just with the view of these VMs, but also with VM lifecycle management. So that, for example, you can start, stop all the VMs, you can resize them, you can create new ones, and that all through the control plane. Now, you would say, okay, well, why would I do that, right? There's a couple of reasons why you would want to do that. First of all, we're aiming for that single control plane to actually manage all your resources. So you can actually go out, and it doesn't really matter where your workload or your application is running. With Azure Arc, we bring that into the Azure control plane. So that is definitely a huge help for many of our customers. Secondly, you would probably be able to, not probably, but you are able to use not just the portal UI or something like that. You really have the Azure Resource Manager behind it. So it means you can use ARM templates, for example. You can use the CLIs and stuff like that to actually, for example, deploy new VMs or manage these VMs, right? So you can have an ARM template as similar as you would create a VM running in Azure, to now create a VM running on premises on your vSphere environment. So that is pretty cool. And again, there's a ton of awesome stuff there. And the third one, which I also find super interesting, is if you now, there's an option. So if you now, for example, deploy a new VM using the through Azure Arc on top of vSphere, you can also say, hey, I want to directly onboard that machine to Azure Arc enabled servers, right? So you then get the in-guest experience for Arc enabled servers as well. You can do the monitoring part, you can do the policy part, security center, all that good stuff, and it gives you all those management capabilities you're already familiar with from Azure Arc enabled servers.
Now with Ignite, obviously one of the biggest fun things at Ignite is actually to meet the people in person. And given the whole situation, we had now quite a few events from Microsoft being done virtually, including builds and Ignite, multiple Ignite actually. And we always had the chance to do like, we call them roundtable basically at Microsoft, where we get that interaction with customers that we really seek, but it's hard in the virtual world. And you could say after the first events you saw a little bit of online fatigue, and it can always be a hit and miss in this roundtable if you have people that want to collaborate and exchange, or is it a quiet group and it's almost like an additional session, if you will, where it's just Microsoft doing the talking versus what we really seek to do the listening. And so this year I got the chance to participate in one with a few of the PMs, which was around navigating Microsoft's hybrid technologies with Arc, HCI, the different Azure Stack offerings, how it all comes together. And I was super pleasant surprised about it. It was really collaborative, it was a good group size, a lot of exchange, a lot of just situations for us to learn from them. It was also interesting, we did a few polls in Teams, which now it's natively supported, which is kind of neat. You talked earlier before that a lot of customers asked to run AVD on premises on Azure Stack Hdi in their data center. So we gave them these options, what's the driver behind your hybrid strategy, right? Is it the connectivity? Is it the compliance piece? And surprisingly, it was very equally spread. You have a winner with 32%, but overall, it's equally spread. My next week's episode actually will be specifically around the roundtable and some of the key learnings we had there. But that was interesting to me, see that it's equal. And then there was some that selected other reason. And there actually was a person that was talking about cost. They had a massive big machine in Azure, where it seems like the monthly reoccurring cost was cheaper for the customer in the end to buy the hardware once, kind of do that investment, and then not have to pay, let's say, on a monthly basis. I mean, I know both things have, everything has two sides in life, right? It's like buying a car, leasing a car, etc., etc. It's you have to find what is right to you. But that was super interesting. Now, for us, it was a way to get a little bit feedback of what is on top of mind with them. You are very connected to the community. What would you say of those announcements have driven the most energy or buzz, if you will, in the community?
Oh, well, I saw so many interesting things and so many feedback on all of the stuff. And again, I also want to quickly highlight there's obviously a much more than I just said, right? On the Azure Stack HCI things, what I also saw driving some buzz is when we look at what we announced is that we're going to support, for example, the extended security support, or in future a licensing model for Windows Server coming through an Azure subscription. Those were also things which suddenly were basically not the big cover announcements, but had a big impact on the people who actually need this. And so, well, if we talk about this, I think depending on the group, in the virtual or the hybrid cloud, multi-cloud environment, I think depending on the group. So there's the group obviously which was very excited about Azure Virtual Desktop. Those are everyone who's dealing with VDI in that space. They people were crazy for it, right? And then you had obviously the VMware administrators, and which also do for example work with Azure. They were obviously very excited about the Azure Arc enabled Vsphere. So yeah, I personally like these two announcements were very strong. But again, there were so many small things, so many improvements done through the whole product series. And again, I'm also not even familiar with all of the announcements we have in all the spaces, right? I still need to go through because there's so many of these announcements, not just the big ones we did in the keynotes, but also small, not smaller ones, but less highlighted ones, if you will, during all of the sessions, right? And so there's a ton of stuff out there which people get really happy. But I personally, if you would ask me, I got so many excitement about AVD on Azure Stack HCI and as well as Arc-enabled vSphere.
Do you have a blog or something that we could send watchers or viewers of this episode that they want to learn more, that you would send them to?
Yeah, so definitely, I haven't really didn't read or write about all of the things yet on my personal blog. There will be coming out blogs in the next couple of weeks about the different topics there. So it's thomasmaurer.ch. I also highly recommend that you check out itopsdoc.com. There we have our team blog, right? A lot of like the stuff our team is doing, but also a lot of like IT Pro related content. And what we have there as well, which I should highlight, is the what we call the blueprint file series, right? So we had the chance to help working on a couple of sessions for Ignite, and obviously our audience loves to have some deep dive content. And so we're working with the Microsoft Studios team together to do some lightboarding sessions. So they've actually, like, people are really explaining a concept on a lightboard, which is similar to a whiteboard, but you can actually see through, and explaining the concept of how these things work, how they're connected, and go really deep into this. And one of the sessions, for example, was AKS on Azure Stack HCI, so our Azure Kubernetes service on Azure Stack HCI. And from that one, we got also a lot of awesome feedback, because people were really able to really go and understand how is the control plane built, how is it working, what do I need, and all that. And we realized that because people then also joined our Ask the Expert session. So there's also a Ask the Expert session to these blueprint file sessions, especially the AKS on Azure Stack HCI one, but we also had one on Windows Update, like Windows Update for Business. How does that work? We had some on identity for passwordless and much more. So we had some really good feedback there as well. And you can now, when you go to that blog, you can now find the links there to the sessions. So the recordings are available to you to actually go out and watch these things.
Thank you so much. I will make sure I put them in the description of the video, as well as put them in post-production so people see it on screen. Thanks again for joining me today. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Dave, and it's always fun to join you, and I hope to see you soon again in person.
Thanks, Thomas. And with that, DDiv Kurt out.